When I was in college, I worked as a reporter for my university's newspaper. This meant that along with keeping up with my classes, I was also running all over our large campus to check up on anything exciting going on, do a few interviews, and then get back to the campus newspaper headquarters on the far side of campus. On one particular fall night, I was covering a speech that a famous politician was giving at our college. He talked for a long time, and by the time he was finished, it was after 9 at night. I groaned when I noticed the time. I still had to walk all the way over to the campus headquarters, which was at least a half-hour walk. I would then have to write my story so that it could go to the press tomorrow. It was a cool night and I was walking quickly, eager to get out of the cold wind. This was the same walk I had done time and time again, but normally not so late at night. There were very few people on the street. I looked around and noticed that there was an unmarked white van driving slowly not too far behind me. It made me suspicious, but I assured myself that I had just watched way too many scary movies and was being overly paranoid. I pulled the hood of my coat up over my head and clutched my phone tightly in my hand, ready to call for help if I needed to. The van sped up and drove past me. I knew I was just imagining things, I thought to myself. I made it the rest of the way to the office without an incident. It took me some time to go through my notes and piece together the story, and it was just around midnight when I finally finished. I packed up my stuff and prepared to make the long hike across campus to my dorm. The streets were especially dark and scary at this hour, but I kept up my pace. All I could think about was getting to my dorm room and collapsing into bed. Suddenly, before I could even process what was happening, 3 men, all wearing dark clothes and ski masks, jumped out of an alleyway and ran toward me. They hauled me up by my arms and covered my mouth so I couldn't scream. They pulled me into the alley and immediately I recognized the same van that I suspected was following me earlier. They had been watching me, planning their attack. They stuffed me into the van roughly. One man jumped into the driver's seat while the other 2 climbed into the back with me. One of them held me down while the other wrapped a layer after layer of duct tape around my wrists and then my ankles. I was screaming like crazy and thrashing around trying to get away, but they were so much larger than I was. "Give up the fight, little girl. You're no match for us," one of the men said before placing a strip of duct tape over my mouth. They had me pinned down so that I couldn't look out the window to see where we were going, but it felt like we had driven at least 15 minutes before coming to a stop. One of the men reached into his pocket and pulled out a blindfold, which he put over my eyes. The next thing I knew, I was being hauled out of the car and into some unknown building. It was very quiet, and all I could hear were our footsteps. I felt myself being pushed down into a chair. The blindfold was then removed from my eyes, and I took in my surroundings. We were in a very fancy home with a marble staircase, expensive-looking furniture, and exquisite art pieces. It was the opposite of what I had been expecting to open my eyes to. The 3 men were still wearing face masks. I listened to them speak to each other as they moved about the room. The biggest man was named Jay, and he appeared to be the one in charge. The other 2 men were taking his orders. Before me was a table with multiple televisions and computers and wires stretching all over the place. I was so confused. One of the shorter men approached me and I shuddered in fear as he grabbed my purse off my shoulder and rifled through it. He took out my phone and handed it to Jay. Jay examined the phone briefly before stalking over to me and ripping the duct tape off my mouth in one fluid motion, causing my skin to burn. I screamed out. "What's your password?" he asked me, and I told him. "Nearly 1,000 Instagram followers, huh? Guess you're pretty famous," he jeered. I only shook my head. "Well, you will be by the time we're done with you," he said ominously, and my stomach dropped. "I suppose you're wondering why we've brought you here, aren't you?" he asked. I nodded hesitantly. "Are you familiar with someone by the name of Mr. Grayson?" he asked. "He's my dad," I squeaked out. Suddenly, it hit me why they were doing this. My dad is the CEO of a large pharmaceutical company. He is worth millions of dollars, but I never talk about him to anyone because I don't want to appear as if I'm not humble. He keeps a very private life, and most people I meet don't realize I'm his daughter. Surely these people were going to use me to manipulate my father into doing something. My realization must have been evident on my face because Jay chuckled slightly. "You spoiled little rich girl. Let's hope Daddy's money doesn't let you down now," he told me. He then stood up and punched me right in the face. I felt a crack and I knew my nose was broken. I was screaming in pain while warm blood dripped from my face onto my white hoodie. My hands were still bound, so I had no way of wiping the blood away as it dripped onto my mouth. Tears were streaming down my face and I was sobbing uncontrollably. "That should do the trick," Jay said, examining the fist he just used to hit me with. He then grabbed a whiteboard off the table and began writing on it. He then walked over and handed it to me. It was a list of numbers. "We're going to send a little video to your daddy. This is what you're going to say, and if you mess it up, you'll regret it," he told me. "You're going to say, 'My name is Jacqueline Grayson, and this message is for my father, Jack Grayson. I have been taken captive and am in immediate danger. You are to have a total of $1 million wired to the account number on this board before 3 a.m. this morning, October 11th. If you fail to do so, I will be killed." My heart was thudding in my chest and I was beyond terrified. Surely they wouldn't really do it. My dad had the money to have them tracked down. If they killed me, he would find them without a doubt. Jay picked up a large camera from on top of the desk and stood directly in front of me. He then pressed a button and pointed it at me. "Go," he said in a cold voice. I struggled to recite the message in between sobs. My voice was high and shaky, but I knew they would punish me if I failed to get through the message. After I finished, Jay shut off the camera and shoved it into the hands of the shorter men. "Post it to her Instagram story and be sure that her father is tagged," he told them. "Let's see how long it takes for your daddy to put together the money to save his precious little daughter." My throat was burning with thirst. Eventually, I could take it no longer. I cleared my throat and said, "Please, could I just have some water?" Jay turned to glare at me and then asked for one of his men to get me a cup of water from the kitchen. One of the men returned a few minutes later and handed me a glass of water. I chugged it in a matter of seconds. "Do you need more?" the man asked in a voice that was gruff, but not necessarily mean. "Yes, please," I told him. He nodded curtly and then walked to the kitchen to refill the cup. This time, I sipped more slowly, not wanting it to run out. "Tick-tock, sweetheart, we're running out of time," Jay told me, clearly trying to intimidate me. I remained silent. "Do you think we need to give your daddy a little more incentive? It's nearly 1 a.m, he said threateningly. I began hyperventilating again. "No, please, I'm sure he's just getting his accounts in order," I said, begging. Jay was silent for a moment. "If we get to 2 a.m. and he still hasn't sent the money, we'll be making him another little movie." He then turned on a digital clock on one of the screens and turned it so it was facing me. I watched in terror as the seconds began ticking by. Every moment, I was getting closer and closer to my likely death. Within the next 45 minutes or so, I did my best to prepare myself to die. I had seen enough crime documentaries to understand how this was going to go. Sure, my dad would send them the money. He would do anything to save me. But I doubted that they would keep me alive. They would kill me, drop my body off somewhere, and then be out of the country before anyone knew what had happened. I felt oddly calm as I accepted my fate. I wasn't worried about myself anymore. All I could think about was my family and friends and the pain they would experience when they found out I was dead. I only hoped Jay and his cronies wouldn't inflict too much pain upon me before my death. It was getting closer and closer to 2 a.m., and my dad still hadn't wired the money. Jay was getting impatient. He was stomping around the room and breaking things. He even threw a vase to the ground and it shattered, flying everywhere. He let out an angry roar and even 2 of his cronies appeared scared. He took a couple of deep breaths to calm himself and then slowly went over and opened a black suitcase that was propped against a wall nearby. He rummaged around for a minute before finally selecting something from inside of it. My blood ran cold when I realized it was a long, sharp-bladed knife. Much to my surprise, he yanked off his ski mask in one quick motion and turned to look at me. I don't know what I was expecting him to look like, but it wasn't this. He was startlingly handsome, but dangerous looking. He had a sharp jawline, emerald green eyes, and an array of facial tattoos. I want you to see the enjoyment in my face when I do what I'm about to do. He stalked towards me quickly and grabbed my chin roughly in one hand. He then looked at the clock and began counting down as it grew closer and closer to 2 a.m. I knew that 2 a.m. had arrived when I felt a sudden prick of pain right above my right eyebrow. "I'll carve you like a jack-o'-lantern." The pain spread down my face quickly, and I knew he was slicing my face open. I was screaming bloody murder when all of a sudden there was a huge loud bang, followed by a ton of people screaming at once. I opened my eyes and saw that the room had been filled with people in tan uniforms, all with guns drawn. They wore what I assumed were bulletproof vests, all with the word SWAT printed across them. My abductors made a quick attempt to run, but they were all coerced like animals about to be slaughtered. They were taken down and quickly handcuffed. The next thing I remember is my dad standing by my side. He was wearing a rumpled suit and looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Are you okay? Are you okay?" he kept asking in a panicked voice. I could only nod my head yes. An officer quickly unbound my wrists and ankles, and my dad swept me up effortlessly into his arms and led me away. My eyelids felt incredibly heavy, and eventually I fell into a deep, troubled sleep. I awoke in a deeply sterile room with beeping going on all around me. Suddenly, memories flashed through my brain, and I was reminded of my horrific abduction. I shot up into a sitting position, breathing heavily. Instantly, my mom was at one side of my bed and my dad was on the other. "It's okay, you're in the hospital," my mom said, stroking my hair and attempting to calm me down. Slowly, everything that had happened to me the day before replayed in my mind. The walk home from the office, the abduction, the torture, and my later rescue. Once I had settled down and was fully awake, my mom began to slowly explain to me what had happened. My dad had been awakened in the middle of the night by messages from his team that had seen my hostage video. They explained the situation to him, and he and his team went to work immediately. They contacted the FBI, who were able to ping my cell phone, leading them to my exact location. As it turned out, Jay and his cronies had broken into that house that belonged to an elderly widow who lived in a mansion not far from my campus. They had killed her and taken over her residence as a type of lair that they were using to run a drug ring and human trafficking scheme. The reason that law enforcement had waited so long to break entry was because they were unsure what type and how many weapons Jay had at his exposure. My dad's biggest concern was that I would somehow be further injured or killed during the process of the attack. Luckily, Jay and his two cronies, which I now know are named Sam and Paul, have been taken into custody. They were wanted in relation to a long list of crimes. Once I realized that I was safe, I was allowed to concentrate on the next thing I was worried about. "How bad off am I?" I asked my mom. She paused for a moment and swallowed. "The important thing is that you're safe and you'll make a full recovery." "How bad am I, Mom?" I asked again, panic filling my voice. My mom didn't answer, but my dad finally spoke up. "You have a broken nose and some shattered ribs. Your face was badly damaged. They had to repair your facial bone structure," his voice trailing off. "Let me see a mirror," I said firmly. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at my appearance. I was absolutely hideous, completely unrecognizable. I looked like a puzzle that had been put together with a bunch of pieces missing. My recovery was long and challenging, but I didn't complain. After all, I was alive. One Saturday when I was in high school, one of the moms in my neighborhood asked if I could help with babysitting. She had two older boys who were going to be participating in an all-day wrestling tournament. She didn't want to bring her younger two sons, Grace and Mary, because she knew that they would be running around causing a ruckus the whole time. Grace was 3 years old, and Mary was only 1. I loved little children, so of course I agreed. I showed up that morning right on time, and the mother gave me some brief instructions before taking off with the rest of the family. I kept the girls busy through most of the morning with cartoons and crafts, but by noon, they were getting restless. I was running out of ideas of ways to keep them occupied. I figured that some fresh air would probably do them some good. I took them out into the garage, pulled their coats on, and then packed them into a stroller for a walk. I recalled that there was a pretty decent neighborhood park not too far away and decided to take the girls there and let them run around and burn some energy for a while. When we reached the park, I immediately noticed how crowded it was. There were children running around everywhere and parents sitting around on benches chatting and sipping coffee. It wasn't surprising it was so busy since it was a beautiful day outside. I unbuckled the girls and let them run around freely. I quickly realized it was going to be a bit of a challenge to keep track of them. They ran fast and blended in with all the other little children. I would be trying to help Grace across the monkey bars one minute, only to realize that Mary had tripped while running and was crying on the other side of the playground. I eventually got Mary calmed down and was pushing her on the swing while watching Grace play with another little girl in a nearby sandbox. All of a sudden, a woman who I assumed was one of the moms came up to me and asked if Grace and Mary were my children. I chuckled and told her no, that I was still in high school and was just babysitting for a friend. I told her I had grown up in the neighborhood though. She asked me about my parents and where I went to school. She was an easy conversationalist, and before I knew it, about 15 minutes had gone by. I realized I didn't even know which of the children on the playground were hers. I asked her, and she gestured vaguely to a group of little girls playing nearby, not specifying which one was hers. I looked around and I noticed that I could no longer see Grace. She had been in front of me just a moment ago. Where did she run off to? I began to get frantic, dread filling my chest. All the while, the woman continued to drill me with these nosy questions. "I don't see Grace. I don't know where she went," I said aloud. "I'm sure she's fine," the woman said, dismissing me. I was irritated that she couldn't see my panic. I snatched Mary out of the swing and into my arms. "I have to go," I told the woman and took off running. I could hear her calling out to me, but I paid no attention to her. I kept running and running, my head spinning as I searched for Grace in a panic. I had been trusted to take care of her and I had lost her. I felt myself beginning to hyperventilate as I started to scream her name over and over. People were looking at me strangely and Mary was beginning to cry. I was scaring her. Suddenly, a dark-haired girl, about 9, came up to me. "Are you looking for the little girl with curly hair and a pink raincoat?" she asked me. Yes, have you seen her?" I asked quickly. "A man in a long black coat came up to her when she was at the sandbox. He asked her if she wanted to see his puppy, and she said yes. He was leading her towards the parking lot." I thought it was strange because he didn't have any kids with him. Immediately, I took off running in the direction of the parking lot, the girl following behind me. Suddenly, I saw her. I knew it was her instantly when I saw the unicorn on the back of her jacket. She was holding hands with a man in a long coat. He was leading her away at a brisk pace, so fast that she looked like she was stumbling. "Hey, where do you think you're going? Leave her alone," I shouted hysterically. The man did not look back at me, but only kept dragging Grace along. When Grace saw me, she began whimpering and pulling in my direction. I couldn't run fast enough with Mary in my arms. "Give me the baby," the dark-haired girl told me, and I did as she said. I knew I could trust her. I finally caught up with the man and Grace in the parking lot. "Let go of her!" I screamed over and over. The man wasn't stopping and showed no signs of releasing her. Suddenly, the man screeched out in pain and yanked his hand away from Grace. With shock and some admiration, I realized that Grace had bit down on his hand. She ran towards me immediately and I picked her up. By this point, we had gathered some attention from the parents at the park. "Are you okay?" one mom shouted out. "That man tried to kidnap a child," I yelled. "I'll call 911, another person said. The man ran to an unmarked car, jumped in, and took off, his tires screeching as he drove away. Police arrived quickly, but not in time to stop the man. Everyone at the park who had witnessed the situation gave their accounts of what happened, and Grace and Mary's parents were notified. Unfortunately, to this day, the man is still out there running free. I hope for the sake of other children that he is soon caught and put in prison where he belongs. I'm forever grateful for the dark-haired girl who knew something wasn't right and spoke up about it. If not for her, I don't know if Grace would be alive today. Sleep tight.